Clyburn. Joining me now is Senator Tammy Duckworth, the Democrat of Illinois. She is a U.S. military veteran. And Senator, the president spoke today, did the commencement at West Point. And you said earlier today that he missed an opportunity to deal with systemic racism. Explain that to me, what you raised in your written piece.
Well, you know, Reverend Sharpton, the president, I mean, number one, he should never have brought those cadets back to West Point just to hear him give a speech. He could have done it via video. And by the way, some of those cadets ended up testing positive for COVID-19. But he spent most of his speech talking about football scores and sports teams. This is one of the most diverse classes to ever graduate from West Point. Well over 100 Black cadets, over 100 female cadets, a big chunk of Asian American cadets. And he did not take this time at a time when our nation is hurting and we're wounded to try to bring us together and talk to these cadets about their roles as the future leaders of our military, and that there is systemic racism in all institutions in this country, to include the military, and that it is their role to take leadership and to fight against that systemic racism. He didn't even mention it at all, and I think this was a very much a missed opportunity. And I think he probably did it on purpose. He wanted to talk about football scores more than he did want to talk about, racism in America when it needs to be talked about.
You wrote an op-ed for Time magazine this week, the headline reading, "Our Black service members deserve better than military bases named after Confederate officers." And I know you served at some point at one, I believe in Alabama. As a veteran, did it really bother you that you in Alabama served at a base named after a Confederate who not only supported the Confederacy, supported the sustaining and continuation of slavery, but they were traitors to the United States?
Yes, well, that is a real problem. We need to change all of those names. And there are very good folks that we could actually rename these bases for. Let's name it for William Carney, the first Black American born a slave to win the Medal of Honor, to receive the Medal of Honor. How about Robert Augustus Sweeney, a sailor, also born a slave? He won 2 Medal of Honors. We have, First Nation soldiers, Red Cloud Mitchell Red Cloud, who fought in Korea, who was also a Medal of Honor recipient. There are many much more deserving folks to name our military installations after than people who declared war against the United States and were traitors to our nation, and who fought, who did that because they wanted to own and kill other people, Black Americans.
And they were traitors. I mean, I don't know how someone would want to serve at Benedict Arnold Air Force Base or Army Base. Let me ask you this. You have new legislation coming out. Explain it to me about your legislation on policing.
Well, it's actually, unfortunately, old legislation that Leader McConnell keep refusing to move. It's something that I worked on following the Laquan McDonald killing in Chicago. And in fact, it was then Lori Lightfoot, before she became mayor, who advised me on it. And I worked on this legislation and improved on some legislation that already existed. It provides for money to the states. You said earlier, what do we need to do at the federal government to help states fight systemic racism in our criminal justice system? Well, we can provide funding, and my bill would provide funding to police forces for training. And if you want this money for training, then you must conduct training about systemic racism, especially among Black Americans, that exists in our entire criminal justice system. It also has a provision where police forces would have independent review of police-involved shootings and killings, because you shouldn't have the same prosecutor investigate the police department that they work with on a regular basis. They have an inherent bias on behalf of that local department. It should be an independent third party that comes in and does this review. So that's my piece of legislation. I keep reintroducing it. It goes nowhere because the Republicans, and in this case, Mitch McConnell, will not let it move. And I just introduced it, Reverend Sharpton, a week and a half ago on the floor. And in fact, Lamar Alexander came to the floor and opposed the unanimous consent I asked to pass this legislation, just as by the way, they came out and they opposed Kamala Harris and Cory Booker's legislation against lynching. How can you not support legislation opposing lynching in this day and age?
In the middle of all of this, they would not move forward a bill on lynching, and they would not deal with your bill on police reform that's been going on since the McDonald case, which happened 3 or 4 years ago.
Exactly. And by the way, you know, we need to talk. I mean, this is systematic. This is all of that, but it's also inequality when it comes to an environment. You know, we put our most toxic substances into and industries into Black neighborhoods, and so our Black kids grow up with higher rates of asthma. They don't have as much access to health care, which makes them more, you know, susceptible to get the COVID-19, get ill. I mean, there is systematic inequalities in our country, and if we want to move on and be a leader of the free world, which we should be, then we need to address this and make our nation stronger.
Oh yeah, if you're Black or people of color, I Can't Breathe happens in many dimensions of American life. Thank you, Senator, for being with us.